Set two documents side by side, and this story should not be possible. Document 1, a letter from Benjamin Franklin addressed to General George Washington, introducing a Lieutenant General of Prussia, more than 20 years of royal service, aide-de-camp to Frederick the Great, command of an entire kingdom's supply lines. Document 2, the actual Prussian military file. A captain. Discharged in 1763 at 33 for reasons nobody ever recorded. No lieutenant general's commission, no command of anything resembling a kingdom's logistics. Both documents landed on Washington's desk in the winter of 1778. Only one of them was true, and the army built on top of that contradiction went on to fight the British to a standstill in open country 5 months later. That is not how 18th century military hiring is supposed to work. A fabricated resume handed to the most desperate army on the continent should have ended in a scandal, a court-martial, or worse, a chain of command built on a lie, collapsing exactly when it mattered. Instead, it produced the opposite. So before anything else, the paperwork needs sorting. Start with the man on paper, Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, born 1730 in the fortress town of Magdeburg, son of a Prussian military engineer who once dragged his 14-year-old boy along to watch a siege at Prague. By 17, Steuben was a lieutenant. He fought through the grinding attrition of the 7 Years' War, took a wound on the Russian front, and climbed close enough to Frederick the Great to serve at his headquarters. A real career. Then, in 1763, at war's end, it stopped cold. Discharged as a captain. He would only ever blame an inconsiderate step and an implacable personal enemy. 9 words, and he never explained a single one of them further. What followed was a decade spent managing the household finances of a court too small to matter. Hohenzollern-Hechingen, in the southwest corner of the Holy Roman Empire. Steward, not soldier. The post came with a title, Freiherr, Baron, and a decoration, the Order of Fidelity, an 8-pointed silver star stamped with one word, Fidelitas. Loyalty, worn on the chest of a man about to become very good at inventing his own. Then the second document enters the file. In 1777, an accusation reached the Hechingen court concerning Steuben's private conduct. Serious enough, under the law of the period, that French clergy were preparing to have him arrested the moment he crossed back into France. This wasn't gossip that blew over. It was the kind of allegation that ends careers and closes borders. Steuben fled the court. He had an old contact in the French War Ministry and an open invitation to England. What he did not have was time or a clean record to travel on. 2 men solved that problem for him, and neither of them told the whole truth doing it. Benjamin Franklin and Silas Deane, representing the American cause in Paris, were buried under applications from unemployed European officers, so many that Congress had grown openly hostile toward hiring more foreigners. An obscure, disgraced ex-captain had no realistic path through that door. So Franklin and Deane didn't send him through it as himself. Their letters to Congress described a lieutenant general with more than 20 years' service under the King of Prussia, a phrase lifted almost directly from the recommendation itself, battle-hardened, closely tied to Frederick, formerly responsible for the entire Prussian Quartermaster Corps. Almost none of it held up. All of it got him hired. A historian studying the case later called it the greatest public deception ever perpetrated in a good cause. Financed by a loan from a French playwright, Pierre-Augustin Caron de Beaumarchais, better known for writing The Barber of Seville, Steuben sailed for America that September, requesting no salary, only expenses. A quiet detail that mattered more than it looked. A man asking for nothing is a man with very little to lose. He landed at Portsmouth in December, then rode for weeks through a collapsing Pennsylvania winter. On February 23, 1778, he reached the camp that would either finish exposing him or bury the fiction for good under the weight of something real. What he found waiting there made his invented resume look almost restrained by comparison. 12,000 men dug into log huts on a frozen ridge above the Schuylkill River. Not enough food, not enough blankets, barely any shoes, Washington had already written that his own army could be tracked by the blood in the snow. Disease was finishing what the British hadn't managed on any battlefield. Records disagree on the final toll, but the range sits somewhere close to 2,000 dead before the winter broke. Typhus, dysentery, pneumonia, smallpox spread across 6 starving months, not a single lost engagement. No British army stood in front of this camp. None was needed. It was already losing on its own. And riding into that collapse came a man carrying a Prussian general's reputation he had never actually earned. About to be handed the one job in the entire Continental Army capable of testing that lie in front of everyone who mattered. Washington didn't hand him the full title. Not yet. He handed him a probationary one, acting inspector general. Just enough authority to either confirm the letters from Paris or unravel them completely. Steuben's tour of the camp turned up something worse than the death toll suggested. There was no shared drill. Every regiment fought however its own colonel happened to teach it, which meant no 2 units could reliably maneuver side by side. Muskets got loaded in whatever order a soldier remembered under pressure. Latrines sat too close to drinking water. The men weren't cowards. Brandywine and Germantown had already proven that badly. The problem wasn't courage. It was chaos with no system underneath it. Steuben's fix started with 100 men. In March, he assembled a model company, soldiers pulled from across the camp, including part of Washington's own guard, and drilled them personally. That detail is worth sitting on. In European armies, a general did not run drill himself. Sergeants did that work. A lieutenant general, which is what Steuben was still officially claiming to be, would never have been caught in the mud correcting a private's footwork. Steuben did it anyway. He had almost no English and, by that point, very little reputation left to protect. The language barrier produced one of the stranger operational details of the entire winter. Steuben wrote his drill instructions in French. His secretary, a 17-year-old named Pierre-Étienne Duponceau, translated them into English. Alexander Hamilton and John Lawrence, both on Washington's staff, cleaned up the phrasing before it reached the men. When the model company botched a movement, Steuben, reportedly out of patience in German, then French, fell back on the one English curse he'd apparently absorbed on the voyage over. God damn. Soldiers who watched him lose his temper in 3 languages said it landed harder than any calm correction could have. He also stripped the system down to what an exhausted farmer could actually execute under fire. Prussian drill was notoriously intricate. Steuben cut musket loading to a tight 8-count sequence. He pushed the marching cadence from a walking 75 steps a minute to a brisk 120 and swapped the Army's long single-file columns for compact columns of 4. A formation that could snap into a fighting line in a fraction of the time. 100 men learned it first. Then those 100 split off, brigade by brigade, and taught it outward. An army rebuilding its own discipline from the inside, with almost no outside help. That drill field discipline is exactly the kind of paper trail we chase down here at Kingdom Keys, the training record nobody bothered to check before it won a battle. By May 5th, Washington had seen enough evidence to drop the word acting. Steuben became Inspector General of the Continental Army, full stop. Roughly 90 days after riding into that frozen camp, a scattered, half-starved militia had absorbed one foreign officer's private curriculum and turned it into a shared system. That winter, Steuben compiled the whole method into a single manuscript. Regulations for the order and discipline of the troops of the United States. Congress approved it the following spring. Soldiers just called it the Blue Book. Paper doctrine is cheap, though. 6 months of drilling in a frozen camp could still fall apart the moment real muskets started firing back. There was exactly one way to find that out, and it arrived less than 3 weeks after the Army marched out of Valley Forge. June 28, 1778. Monmouth Courthouse, New Jersey. Heat past 100 degrees. Hot enough that men on both sides would die of it before the sun went down, and no drill manual on earth prepares a soldier for that part. Washington sent roughly 5,000 men under General Charles Lee to strike the British column as it pulled out of Philadelphia. Lee hit stiffer resistance than expected and ordered a retreat that started sliding into something closer to a collapse. Washington rode forward himself, furious, relieved Lee on the spot, and did something this army had never reliably managed before. Reformed broken units under direct fire without the whole line folding. That was the real exam. Not a parade ground. An open field, brutal heat, British regulars closing in on troops that had just been shoved backward in disorder. They held. Colonel Joseph Silly pulled together a battalion drawn from 18 different units, men who had never drilled together as a single body, and marched them through complex battlefield maneuvers, under fire, well enough to push the King's Own Highland Regiment off the ground it held. Anthony Wayne's regiment swung from marching column into firing line to meet a British dragoon charge, cleanly, the way Steuben had drilled it into muscle memory for months. Henry Knox's artillery, trained through that same brutal winter, performed well enough that even skeptical officers stopped doubting it. The Heat wrote its own casualty report. American losses ran close to 69 killed, 161 wounded, 132 missing. British losses landed in a similar range, except close to 60 of their reported dead were recorded as fatalities from heat stroke and exhaustion rather than combat wounds. By nightfall, the British slipped away toward New York, and the field, technically, belonged to no one. Historians still call Monmouth a tactical draw. It didn't feel like a draw to the men standing in that line. For the first time in the war, a Continental force had absorbed a battlefield disaster in progress, reformed under direct fire, and held against British regulars in open country. One officer's private assessment of what it meant for the man behind the training came down to a single word: vindication. And here is where the fabricated resume stops being a clever backstory and becomes a problem Steuben had to manage for the rest of his life. Congress never formally corrected his rank on the record. The invented Lieutenant General simply dissolved into Acting Inspector General, then Inspector General, and nobody with the authority to unravel it had much appetite for doing so in the middle of a war his training was visibly winning. Resentment simmered anyway. Plenty of American-born officers, already sour about foreign volunteers jumping the queue for prestige commissions, weren't fooled by the Prussian mystique. Steuben spent years managing a reputation built on a foundation he knew wouldn't survive close inspection. The fabrication worked. It never once stopped being fragile. His finances told a parallel story. He'd arrived asking for nothing but expenses and got exactly that. No guaranteed pay for years. He spent much of the war and most of the decade after it petitioning Congress for the compensation he'd been informally promised, while living in a style he felt a nobleman, real or invented, was owed. It took until June of 1790, 7 years after the war ended, for Congress to finally settle on a lifetime pension of $2,500 a year. New York had already granted him 16,000 acres in the Mohawk Valley. It wasn't enough to outrun his own spending. Friends, Hamilton included, quietly arranged mortgages to keep him solvent. He spent his final years splitting time between New York City and a modest 2-room log cabin on that Mohawk Valley land, where his secretary, John Mulligan, kept him company over long games of chess. A stroke ended it on November 28, 1794, in that same simple cabin, a long way from Magdeburg, and further still from the Prussian general staff he'd never actually commanded. He never married. What he owned went to 2 of his closest wartime aides, William North and Benjamin Walker, men who'd been beside him since the mud of that first winter. What survived him was the paperwork itself. The Blue Book stayed the Army's standard drill manual for decades, shaping how American soldiers trained well into the next century. The office he built out of necessity, one inspector, standardizing an entire army's discipline, still exists inside the modern United States Army. So does the underlying method, even stripped of his name. Train a small group to precision, then let them multiply that standard outward through the whole force. Basic training doctrine today still runs on that same logic. None of it needed the general's stars he never actually held. It needed a captain, a fabricated letter, and roughly 90 desperate days to accidentally tell the truth about exactly what that army required. Sit with this. Every drill manual, every rank structure, every court-martial that followed Steuben for the rest of his career was built on top of a document Congress never actually verified. If the discipline holds and the war gets won, does anyone still owe an explanation for the paperwork underneath it? Or does competence simply erase the question? Kingdom Keys was built to pull that exact thread on commanders whose records don't always survive the second look. Subscribe if you want to be there the next time one of them doesn't.